It was a chilly evening in Moscow, and the glow of neon signs reflected off the wet pavements as people hurried home after work. In one of the city's upscale shopping districts, a modest boutique hummed with activity. Among the shoppers was Natasha, a confident young black woman, browsing through winter coats. She had moved to Russia a few years ago, working diligently as a police officer in her off-duty hours. But tonight, she was just another customer, quietly inspecting a sleek navy jacket. The boutique was small but exclusive, with high-end prices that attracted the well-off crowd. Natasha, mindful of the delicate fabric of the coat, gently ran her fingers over it, contemplating her purchase. Meanwhile, two uniformed officers stood near the entrance, eyeing shoppers. Their gazes lingered on her for a little too long, an unmistakable mix of suspicion and prejudice evident in their body language. Without warning, one of the officers approached Natasha aggressively. "Madam, you're coming with us," he said, his tone accusatory. Confused, Natasha lifted an eyebrow. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she replied calmly. But the officer, ignoring her words, grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. The other officer quickly blocked the exit, preventing anyone from intervening. Natasha's mind raced. She had encountered prejudice before, but never so overtly in a public space, and certainly not from law enforcement. Around them, shoppers stopped and stared, whispering to one another. Some reached for their phones, unsure whether to intervene. The officers, seemingly oblivious to the growing attention, continued their accusations. "You're trying to steal. We saw you slip something into your bag." Natasha laughed softly, a sound tinged with disbelief. She reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet, flashing her identification. Not just any ID, but one that proved she was a law-abiding citizen. The officers barely glanced at it. "That's not relevant," one of them sneered. As Natasha was forced into the back of a police vehicle, she noticed the reactions of passers-by, some horrified, others indifferent. A young man with a camera recorded the incident, the glow of his phone screen capturing every tense second. Natasha, though frustrated, kept her composure. She knew losing her temper could escalate the situation dangerously. Inside the vehicle, the officers whispered among themselves, clearly convinced of her guilt based on nothing more than her skin color. Natasha, however, remained calm, silently planning how she would handle the fallout. She was not just any woman. She was a trained law enforcement officer with years of experience in crisis situations. The drive through the snowy streets of Moscow felt long and suffocating. The city lights blurred past the windows, reflecting in Natasha's eyes as she thought about how racial bias could so easily distort perception, even in a profession meant to uphold justice. Little did the officers know, their assumptions were about to collide with a truth that would turn the entire situation upside down. As the police vehicle rattled through the slick, icy streets of Moscow, Natasha remained calm, her mind running through every possible outcome. The two officers, oblivious to who they were dealing with, continued to mutter accusations, convinced they were enforcing justice. They had no idea that the woman sitting silently beside them was not just any shopper. They had just targeted an off-duty police captain with years of field experience. The vehicle stopped outside a small, dimly lit precinct on the outskirts of the city. Natasha was forced out, still maintaining her composure, as a crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the earlier commotion. Some bystanders whispered among themselves, glancing nervously at the officers. Natasha finally spoke, her voice calm but authoritative. "Gentlemen, I am a police captain, currently off duty. I am exercising my right to remain silent until this situation is clarified." The two officers froze, exchanging uneasy glances. One of them, the taller of the two, tried to laugh it off, muttering something about a prank or lying. Natasha, however, reached into her purse and pulled out her official police ID. The gold insignia glinted under the streetlight, leaving no room for doubt. The crowd murmured in surprise as the realization set in. The officers' faces turned pale, their confident arrogance crumbling with every second. "I suggest you apologize immediately," Natasha said, her tone sharp but controlled. You are in serious violation of the law by detaining a fellow officer under false pretenses." The taller officer stammered, clearly unprepared for the confrontation. The other tried to intervene, but Natasha's presence was commanding. She exuded authority that even the most stubborn officer couldn't ignore. Realizing the gravity of their mistake, the two men reluctantly stepped back. Natasha's reputation in the local police community was well known. She had solved high-profile cases, handled organized crime investigations, and trained recruits in tactical operations. To have detained her under the assumption of guilt was a career-threatening error. By now, the crowd had grown, some recording the incident on their phones. The narrative was clear. The officers had acted out of prejudice, targeting an innocent black woman who, ironically, had the authority and training to hold them accountable. Natasha calmly addressed the onlookers. Bias has no place in law enforcement, and today's events are a stark reminder of why accountability matters. The precinct's commanding officer arrived shortly after, summoned by a call from a concerned colleague who had recognized Natasha's name. The two officers were immediately placed under internal review, their actions documented for disciplinary measures. Natasha, meanwhile, declined to press formal charges, choosing instead to make a public statement that would educate rather than punish. As she walked away from the precinct, flanked by supportive colleagues and curious onlookers, Natasha felt a mixture of relief and resolve. The city of Moscow had seen a stark example of racial prejudice, but it had also witnessed the strength, composure, and authority of a woman who refused to be victimized. The lesson was clear. Never underestimate the person you are trying to intimidate. In the days that followed, videos of the incident went viral. Natasha became a symbol of courage and justice, and the two officers learned the hard way that prejudice can lead not only to humiliation, but to accountability. Moscow had witnessed a moment that would be talked about for months, a moment when authority, integrity, and truth triumphed over ignorance and bias.